podcast was created as a supplemental learning resource for our cognitive psychology course. The content is based on course topics and readings from Essentials of Cognitive Psychology by Christopher Klein, along with instructor-developed explanations, examples, and pedagogical framing. AI tools were used to help transform course material into a conversational podcast format, including the use of AI-generated voices. The use of AI voice technology is intended to make the material more engaging, accessible, and flexible for students. However, the podcast should not replace careful reading of the textbook, reviewing course materials, or completing assigned activities. Any interpretations, examples, or explanations included in the podcast are provided for educational purposes and are the responsibility of the instructor. Students should rely on the assigned textbook, course lectures, and official course materials as the primary sources for exams, assignments, and class discussions.
Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, but something fundamental has just completely shifted in your brain.
Oh, this is a fun thought experiment.
Right. So you open your eyes, you look over at your bedside table, and you see this cylindrical ceramic object with a little loop on the side.
And you just stare at it.
Exactly. You stare at it.
Yeah.
You have absolutely zero idea that it holds hot liquids. You don't know you're supposed to pick it up by the loop so you don't burn your hand.
You don't even have the word cup in your head anymore.
No, the word is just gone. So you have to carefully examine it. You're like mathematically deducing its properties, feeling its weight, trying to figure out its potential use from scratch.
Which would take forever.
Right. And then you walk into the bathroom and you're confronted by like a little piece of plastic with bristles on the end. Again, total blank.
You have to analyze the toothbrush from the ground up. What is it? What does it do?
By the time you finally figure out how to brush your teeth, you are completely physically and mentally exhausted. I mean, you'd be paralyzed before you even reach the front door of your house.
It would be terrifying, honestly. You would essentially be an alien on your own planet.
Completely.
And, the only reason you don't live in that constant state of exhausting, ground-up analysis every single day is because of a cognitive mechanism that is just, it's completely invisible to you.
It really is. We just wake up, grab the coffee cup, brush our teeth, let the dog out.
Yeah, interacting with hundreds of distinct, incredibly complex objects without even a second thought.
Which, when you really stop and think about it, is an absolute cognitive miracle.
It is.
We walk around taking this automatic perfection for granted, like breathing. But when you actually drag that invisible process into the light and look at the sheer computational power required to just, recognize a coffee cup, it is completely mind-boggling.
Oh, it's staggering.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are serving as your audio learning companion as you tackle Chapter 7, which is all about knowledge, from the Essentials of Cognitive Psychology texts.
It's such a great chapter. It really is a pivot point in how we understand the brain in this course.
Yeah, how so?
Well, if you think about the broader study of cognition, there's sort of a chronological flow to it. Like, we spent a lot of time looking at perception earlier in the course.
Right, which is all about how we take in raw sensory data from the environment.
Exactly. Light hitting the retina, sound waves vibrating the eardrum. Then we looked at memory in previous chapters, which is the machinery for retaining that information over time.
How we encode it, how we store it, how we pull it back up.
Right, but Chapter 7 is where it all comes together, because perception is taking the data in, and memory is holding on to it. But that's not enough, is it?
No, I mean, just having a giant pile of unorganized memories floating around your head is basically useless.
It's worse than useless, really. It's totally overwhelming. If your brain was just a dumping ground for every visual and auditory experience you've ever had, you would never be able to find anything.
It'd be like a massive library with millions of books just like dumped in a pile in the center of the room.
Yes. No Dewey Decimal System, no aisles, no categories. You wouldn't be able to function.
Yeah.
So the core questions this material answers are, where is the filing system?
Right.
How do we categorize the infinite messiness of the real world? How do we represent those concepts mentally? And most importantly, how is this unimaginably huge web of knowledge physically organized in the brain so that it operates with that blazing efficiency we experience every morning?
It's a lot to cover. So to even begin answering those questions, we have to start by getting our terminology completely straight.
Definitely. Words matter here.
Because in everyday conversation, we use certain words interchangeably that cognitive psychologists treat very, very differently. I'm talking about the words category and concept.
Yeah, we throw them around like they're the exact same thing.
But there is a very deliberate line drawn between them in the source material. So let's clarify that for everyone listening.
It's a great place to start, because mixing them up is where a lot of confusion starts for students. So let's start with a category. A category exists out there in the physical world.
Outside of our heads.
Exactly. It is an actual set of objects or entities that can be treated as equivalent in some meaningful way.
Yeah.
Like the physical trucks driving down the highway right now, hauling cargo.
Yeah.
That collective group of actual physical objects is the category of trucks, or the actual living fish swimming in a stream. That is the biological category of trout. Categories are external.
Okay, so the category is the stuff itself, the physical things in the environment.
Yes. A concept, on the other hand, is entirely internal. It is the mental representation inside your head that corresponds to that category out in the world.
It's the file folder.
Precisely. It is your internal understanding, your psychological file folder for what a truck is or what a trout is.
Okay, let me make sure I've got this. So if I'm holding a physical manila folder in my hand, and it's filled with paper documents, the actual physical folder and the papers inside it, that's the category.
Right.
But my mental understanding of what that folder represents, like the meaning I assign to it in my brain, that's the concept.
That's a really good way to frame it. The category is the physical grouping. The concept is the mental representation of that grouping. And the reason psychologists insist on pulling these two terms apart is that they don't always align perfectly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, sometimes a person's internal concept doesn't accurately map onto the real-world category.
Can you give me an example of that mismatch? Because that sounds interesting.
Well, think about historical misunderstandings of the natural world. For a very long time, the human concept of a fish included whales and dolphins.
Oh, sure.
The mental representation people had was, well, it lives in the ocean, it swims, it has fins, therefore it belongs in the fish file. But the actual biological category out in the world is fundamentally different. Whales are mammals.
Right, so their internal concept was scientifically flawed compared to the external category.
Exactly. But generally speaking, for everyday survival, we rely on our concepts mapping fairly accurately onto real-world categories.
Which actually brings us to the why. Like, why did our brains evolve to do this? Building all these concepts takes energy. Maintaining this massive filing system takes constant cognitive upkeep.
It's a huge energetic cost.
Right. So what is the payoff? The literature uses a very specific word to describe why concepts are essentially a cognitive superpower, and that word is generalization.
Generalization is the absolute engine of human intelligence. It is the ability to make inferences.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, if we didn't have concepts, every single time you encountered a new object, you would have to learn about it from scratch. Just like your morning coffee cup example.
It would be exhausting.
Right. But because you have concepts, you can extend what you've learned about a limited number of objects in your past to a potentially infinite set of new, entirely novel entities that you have never seen before in your life.
The textbook actually has a brilliant concrete example to illustrate this. Let's say you walk into a brand new conference room you've never been in before, and you look up at the ceiling.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You see a plastic box mounted up there, and someone mentions it has a halogen bulb. Now, you have never in your entire life seen that specific object. You don't know its manufacturer, you don't know how old it is, you know nothing about its life story.
But you instantly know what it does. You don't need to investigate it, because your brain immediately categorizes that object into your mental file labeled projector.
Exactly. And the moment it goes into that projector file, I get all this information for free. It's like a cognitive free lunch.
I love that phrase.
Right. I instantly know that if I plug my laptop into it, it will beam an image onto the screen. I know it requires electricity to run. I know that because it has a halogen bulb, it might get incredibly hot if it's left on for 3 hours, so I shouldn't touch the casing.
You didn't have to touch it to know it gets hot.
Nope. I didn't have to turn it on to know it projects an image. My concept did all the heavy lifting.
You bypassed the entire learning process for that specific object. You inferred its properties based on your generalized knowledge. That is the power of concept.
It's amazing.
But, and there's always a but, this mechanism, as elegant as it is, immediately presents a massive structural problem for cognitive psychologists to solve.
Which is?
Well, if these mental folders give us all this free, life-saving information, how does the brain actually decide what gets to go into which folder? When you look at an object, What are the criteria your mind uses to say, yes, this goes in the projector file, or no, this goes in the lighting fixture file?
Ah, right. And for a very long time, the scientific community thought they had a clean mathematical answer to this. They looked at human cognition and basically assumed it operated like a very strict dictionary.
Yes, this is what we call the traditional view, or the definitional approach to categorization.
The definitional approach. Okay, let's get into that.
It was a very appealing idea at first because it was so orderly. The assumption was that every category in our mind was governed by strict, inflexible rules.
Like a checklist.
Exactly like a checklist. Specifically, they believed categories were defined by two criteria: necessary features and jointly sufficient features.
Wait, necessary and jointly sufficient. Let's slow down and break those terms down because they sound incredibly rigid for an intro psychology student.
They are completely rigid by design. Under this old theory, a necessary feature means an object absolutely must possess this specific trait to even be considered for the category. If it lacks this feature, it is immediately rejected.
No exceptions.
Zero exceptions. And jointly sufficient features mean that if an object possesses this exact specific checklist of necessary features, it must belong to the category. There's no gray area. There is no ambiguity.
It is a binary yes or no system. If A, B, and C are true, then it is X.
You got it.
Let's apply that to a real-world example from the text to make it stick. Let's take the concept of a dog. Under this traditional dictionary view, the definition of a dog in your brain might be a strict checklist. It is an animal, it has 4 legs, and it barks.
Simple enough.
Right. So you're walking down the street, you see an entity. Your brain runs the checklist. Is it an animal? Yes. Does it have 4 legs? Yes. Does it bark? Yes. Boom. It has met the jointly sufficient criteria. It goes directly into the dog folder.
And crucially, if it fails even a single one of those necessary criteria, the theory states it cannot be a dog. The system is totally intolerant of exceptions.
But, and here's the big turning point in the chapter, that's exactly where this whole theory violently collides with reality. Because anyone who has spent more than 5 minutes living in the real world knows that nature does not care about strict binary checklists.
Nature is messy.
Extremely messy. What happens if a dog gets into a terrible accident and has to have a leg amputated?
It only has 3 legs now.
Right, so it instantly fails the necessary feature of having 4 legs. Under the strict definitional approach, your brain should theoretically crash or reject it from the dog category completely.
It should look at that 3-legged golden retriever and say, well, it fails the 4-leg rule, so it must be a strange, furry, flightless bird.
Which is absurd. Our brains don't do that. We look at a 3-legged dog and we instantly, effortlessly know it's a dog.
Or consider a dog that has a throat condition or has had a surgical procedure and can no longer bark. It fails the bark's necessary feature. But nobody looks at a mute dog and assumes it belongs to a different species.
No, we just say, oh, that's a quiet dog.
Exactly. The strict dictionary definition view completely falls apart when you apply it to the messy, unpredictable variations of the natural world.
It's actually a really great moment to pause and think about the borderline items we encounter constantly. I want you, the listener, to pause for a second and think about how this shows up in your everyday life. We navigate category fuzziness all the time without even realizing it.
Oh, there's so many good examples of this.
Think about edible seaweed. You see it wrapped around a sushi roll, or you buy it in those little salted snack packs at the grocery store. What is it?
That's a tough one.
Right. Is it a vegetable? Is it a snack? Is it a garnish? It doesn't neatly fit the necessary and sufficient features of any of our normal food concepts.
You can play this game with lots of things. Is a tomato a fruit or a vegetable?
Oh, the classic debate.
Right. Biologically, it's a fruit because it has seeds, but culinary-wise, it functions as a vegetable. Or, my favorite, is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, man, people get so mad about that one.
They do, because technically it's meat between bread, which fits the necessary criteria for a sandwich, but most people instinctively feel that calling a hot dog a sandwich is deeply wrong.
It just feels wrong. The boundaries of our concepts are not sharp lines drawn in permanent marker. They are blurry, overlapping watercolor edges.
And this highlights a very common trap that students fall into when they first start studying cognitive architecture. There's a tendency to want the brain to operate like a computer.
Like a hard drive.
Specifically, like a relational database, executing exact SQL queries. If X equals true, return Y. People want to believe that cognition is built on pristine logic. But the study of human categorization shatters that illusion pretty quickly.
So the human mind is not a rigid database.
No, It is a highly flexible, probabilistic engine that actually thrives on ambiguity.
Which means the entire field of cognitive psychology had to basically throw out the dictionary approach. If we don't use strict checklists of necessary and sufficient features, what do we use? How do we handle the three-legged dogs and the edible seaweed?
That realization led directly to the concept that revolutionized how we understand mental organization.
Typicality.
Typicality, meaning we just accept that not all members of a category are created equal.
Exactly. Since strict definitions fail us, we have to acknowledge that within any given mental folder, there is a hierarchy. Some items are simply better, more representative examples of their category than others.
So the category isn't a flat list.
No, it has a center and it has an edge. Let's look at the category of birds to make this concrete. We all know what a bird is. But if I just say the word bird to you out of nowhere, you are probably going to picture a robin or a sparrow, maybe a pigeon or a blue jay.
Those are highly typical birds.
Right. They sit right in the dead center of the category. They fit the mental mold perfectly.
But what about an ostrich or a penguin?
Well, they are technically birds. Biologically, there is no debate there.
But cognitively, they're a terrible example of birds. They sit way out on the extreme, blurry edge of the category. They are highly atypical.
That makes total sense.
And you see this across all categories. Take furniture. A dining room table or a wooden chair is a highly typical piece of furniture. It instantly registers. But what about a rug or a wall-mounted telephone or a standing lamp?
Wait, is it telephone furniture?
In certain contexts, historically, yes, they were classified as such, but they are highly atypical. They aren't the best examples that jump to mind.
Okay, this makes intuitive sense. But how do researchers actually prove that typicality is a real physical or structural phenomenon in the brain? Because, I mean, you can't just ask people, hey, does a robin feel more birdy to you than a penguin? That's completely subjective. Cognitive psychology requires hard, measurable data.
And the behavioral evidence they found is incredibly robust. One of the primary, undeniable ways researchers measure typicality is by tracking the speed of categorization.
Reaction times.
Yes, they use reaction time studies. You bring a participant into a laboratory, sit them in front of a computer screen, and ask them to verify if an image or a word belongs to a target category by pressing a yes or no button as fast as humanly possible.
And we aren't talking about seconds here. We are talking about milliseconds.
Right. Because when you measure reaction times in milliseconds, you're essentially clocking the speed of an electrical impulse traveling down a physical neural pathway. And the data is crystal clear. Participants identified typical items as category members measurably faster than they identify atypical items.
So if you flash a picture of a robin on the screen and ask, is this a bird? The participant hits the yes button in, say, 400 milliseconds. It is almost instantaneous.
Exact.
But if you flash a picture of a penguin and ask, is this a bird? There is a measurable delay. Maybe it takes them 600 or 700 milliseconds to hit yes. It's just a fraction of a second. But in cognitive terms, that delay is an eternity.
It proves that the brain actually has to work harder. It has to traverse more conceptual distance to verify the penguin.
The reaction time data alone is devastating to the old dictionary view.
It really is.
Because if the brain was just using a binary checklist, a penguin and a robin would be verified at the exact same speed because they both ultimately tick the bird boxes, but they aren't.
Nope. And beyond reaction times, there is also fascinating evidence from how we produce language naturally.
Oh, right. The text highlights this, and it's one of those quirks of human behavior that you never notice until someone points it out. When people are speaking naturally and listing items in a category, they systematically produce typical items before atypical ones.
It governs the flow of our speech without us ever consciously deciding to do it. It's wild.
If you're going to the grocery store, you might say, I need to buy some apples and lemons. That phrasing feels totally natural. It rolls right off the tongue.
Sure.
But if you flip it and say, I need to buy some lemons and apples, it feels subtly weird.
It does. It feels clunky.
Like you put the cart before the horse. And that's because an apple is a highly typical central fruit, while a lemon, being sour and often used as a garnish or an ingredient rather than eaten whole, is a slightly less typical fruit. Our brains instinctively push the best, most typical examples to the very front of the linguistic line.
So we have the reaction times and we have the language production data. We know typicality is real, but this naturally begs a deeper question.
Why is a robin a better bird than a penguin?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What is the actual mechanism making it typical? Is it just mere exposure? Is it just frequency?
Honestly, that would be my first guess. I live in North America. I look out my window. I see robins and sparrows all the time. I've only seen a penguin in a zoo. or on a nature documentary. So obviously, the things I see more often become the typical examples, right?
It's a very logical hypothesis,
Mm-hmm.
but the research shows that frequency is actually not the dominant variable driving typicality.
Really?
Think back to the furniture example. You probably see the rug in your living room every single day. For hours, you step on it constantly. You might only see a formal dining room table occasionally, maybe at a restaurant or a friend's house.
Okay, fair point.
But despite the massive difference in frequency of exposure, the table is still fundamentally a more typical piece of furniture than the rug. So if it isn't just how often we see the object, what is the underlying rule?
And the answer to that mystery comes from a landmark 1975 study by Eleanor Rosch and Carolyn Mervis. They proposed what has become a foundational concept in the field: family resemblance theory.
Family resemblance theory. This is the mechanism that explains the messy, overlapping reality of our mental categories. The core idea that Rosch and Mervis proposed is that an item is judged as typical based on two strict conditions of overlap.
Okay, what are the conditions?
First, the item must possess many features that are highly frequent within its own category. Second, and just as importantly, it must possess very few features that are frequent in other competing categories.
It's entirely about overlapping traits and avoiding contamination from other groups.
Let's look really closely at our robin and our penguin through the lens of family resemblance.
Let's do it. A robin is a small creature. It flies through the air. It sings complex vocalizations. It builds nests out of twigs in the branches of trees.
And every single one of those properties, small, flies, sings, tree nests, is incredibly common across thousands of other bird species.
Right, so the robin has massive feature overlap with its own family. It shares the family nose, the family eyes, the family jawline, so to speak.
It is deeply entrenched in its own category. Now look at the penguin. It doesn't fly. It doesn't sing. It squawks or brays. It doesn't build nests in trees. It huddles on the ice or uses rocks.
So right out of the gate, it is missing almost all of the frequent features of its own biological category.
But family resemblance theory says it gets even worse for the poor penguin.
Because it's not just missing bird features, it's actively hoarding features from the wrong group.
Exactly. The penguin swims expertly underwater. It spends much of its life submerged, and its wings have evolved to function physically exactly like fins.
And swimming underwater with fin-like appendages, those are features that are incredibly dominant in a completely different mental category.
Yeah.
Fish, or marine mammals.
So cognitively speaking, the penguin is an absolute mess.
It's experiencing a total identity crisis. It lacks the family resemblance of birds, and it is heavily contaminated by the family resemblance of fish. No wonder our neural pathways hesitate for an extra 200 milliseconds before allowing it into the bird folder.
It's a brilliant framework. But Rosch and Mervis were rigorous scientists. They knew that if they only used real-world examples like birds and fish, skeptics would argue that the results were just artifacts of participants' prior knowledge.
Or like weird cultural quirks about animals.
Exactly. To truly prove family resemblance theory as a universal cognitive law, they had to isolate the mechanism completely.
They needed to build a scenario where people had absolutely zero prior experience. So they designed an experiment using completely artificial categories.
They created fake objects represented by strings of letters. For example, a string like A, B, C, D, E might be an item in FERC Category 1.
Okay.
By using arbitrary letters, they could mathematically control the exact features. They could build a highly typical fake item that shared 80% of its letters with the rest of its category group, and they could build an atypical fake item that only shared 20% of its letters. They manipulated the exact degree of family resemblance.
That's incredibly elegant. They are essentially building artificial robins and artificial penguins out of the alphabet.
And the results were stunningly definitive. When participants were asked to learn and categorize these meaningless letter strings, the items that were mathematically designed to have high family resemblance, sharing more letters with their own specific group and fewer with the contrasting group, were learned significantly faster.
So the data backed it up perfectly.
Furthermore, when asked to rate them, participants reliably rated those high overlap strings as the best or most typical examples of the newly learned fake categories.
So it's not about culture, and it's not about how many times we've seen a bird outside our window. The human brain is fundamentally a feature-overlapping calculation machine. We constantly, unconsciously scan for family resemblance.
We've completely demolished the idea of the strict dictionary definition at this point.
Yeah.
Typicality and family resemblance rule the day.
But this brings us to one of the most fascinating and frankly contentious debates in all of cognitive psychology. We now know what makes something typical, the overriding features. But how does a brain actually physically store this information?
Right, what's the actual code?
When you hold the concept of a bird in your mind, what exactly are you holding? We are transitioning from the abstract rules of categorization to the actual architecture of representation.
And in the literature, there are two massive rival theories fighting to explain this: prototype theory and exemplar theory.
Let's start with prototype theory. When cognitive psychologists use the word prototype, they aren't talking about like a beta version of a software program or a new car design. What does it mean in this context?
In cognitive psychology, a prototype is a summary representation. It is an abstraction. You can think of it as a mental average of a category as a whole. It does not represent any single specific object you have ever encountered.
Okay, a mental average.
Instead, it is a centralized concept built from a set of weighted features.
Weighted features. Explain how the weighting works for us.
Think of your brain acting as a statistician. Over the course of your life, you see thousands of birds. Your brain tracks the features. It notices that almost every single one has wings and feathers. So for your bird prototype, the features has wings and has feathers are assigned massive heavy weights. They are core to the prototype.
Got it.
It notices that many, but not all, eat worms. So eats worms gets a moderate weight. It notices that a tiny fraction live in Antarctica. So lives in Antarctica gets a very small weight, but importantly, it's not zero. The prototype is the sum total of these weighted averages.
The analogy that always makes this click for me is the police composite sketch. Imagine you are walking down the street and you get robbed by a gang of 5 people.
A terrible day, but a good analogy.
You go to the police station and sit down with the sketch artist. You don't try to draw every single one of the 5 individuals perfectly. Your memory wouldn't allow it anyway. Instead, you describe a blend. You give them the average nose shape of the group, the average jawline, the average eye distance.
The final sketch the artist hands you isn't a portrait of any specific person who robbed you.
Exactly. It's a mathematically averaged, idealized blend of all the features you associate with that gang. The sketch is a summary representation.
That is a perfect, visceral analogy. The prototype is the composite sketch of the category. So let's look at how this hypothetical system actually works in real time when you are interacting with the world. Imagine you are hiking and you see a creature scurry across the path. It is low to the ground, it has scales, and it flicks a forked tongue.
Okay, my brain goes into action. It takes that sensory input, low to the ground, scales, forked tongue, and it starts holding it up against my various composite sketches.
Right, it runs the comparison.
It runs the input against my mammal prototype.
Yeah.
Fur, no. Warm-blooded, probably not. Low score, it rejects it. Then it runs it against my lizard prototype. Scales. High weight, check. Low stance. High weight, check. Forked tongue, check.
The creature scores massively high against the weighted features of your lizard prototype.
The match is made, categorization is complete, and I move on.
That is the elegance of prototype theory. You maintain one central, idealized sketch for each category, and you simply calculate the similarity of any new encounter against that single master sketch.
It is incredibly efficient. It doesn't require you to search through millions of individual memories. You just run a quick feature weight calculation against the prototype.
It sounds perfect. It sounds like exactly how a highly evolved brain should work to save energy. But as we said, it has a major rival. There is another camp in cognitive psychology that completely rejects the composite sketch.
Yes. Exemplar theory. And it throws the prototype completely out the window. Exemplar theory argues that the brain does absolutely no statistical averaging, there is no summary description, there is no master sketch.
At all.
Instead, this theory asserts that your brain simply memorizes every single specific instance, every exemplar of a category that you have ever encountered in your entire life.
It's a bold claim.
Okay, I have to push back on this because it sounds absurd on its face. Are you telling me that exemplar theory believes that my brain doesn't have a general idea of a chair? It actually proposes that I have stored a specific, high-resolution, individualized memory of every single chair my eyes have ever rested on.
That is what the theory proposes.
Every folding chair in my high school gymnasium, every dining chair at every restaurant I've ever eaten at, every plastic waiting room chair at the dentist. That has to be tens of thousands of chairs. How could my brain possibly have the hard drive space or the processing power to search through tens of thousands of specific chair memories every time I want to sit down? It seems wildly inefficient compared to just having one prototype sketch.
Your skepticism is entirely justified, and it perfectly mirrors the reaction of many scientists when the theory was first gaining traction. It feels counterintuitive, and it feels like it would overwhelm the system. But in science, we have to follow the data. And the experimental evidence supporting exemplar theory is shockingly robust. To understand why scientists take it so seriously, we have to look closely at a critical study conducted by Allen and Brooks in 1991.
All right. What did Allen and Brooks do to prove that we are secretly hoarding millions of specific memories?
They designed a very clever experiment to pit abstract rules against specific visual memories. They created a set of richly detailed, complex visual items. These strange, cartoonish, imaginary creatures.
Like little aliens.
Basically, yeah. They brought participants into the lab and explicitly taught them a strict, logical rule for categorizing these creatures into either Category A or Category B.
So they gave them a conscious checklist. If the creature has pointy ears, a long tail, and spots, it belongs in Category A. If it lacks those, Category B.
Exactly. The participants practiced until they fully understood the rule. They were categorizing the training creatures perfectly based on the abstract logic they were taught. Then came the testing phase. The researchers started showing them new creatures to categorize. But Allen and Brooks were devious.
Uh-oh, what did they do?
They sneakily introduced trick items.
What made them trick items?
A trick item was mathematically designed to look visually almost identical to one of the old creatures the participant had studied extensively during training. It shared the overall shape, the color, the general vibe. But the researchers changed one critical, tiny feature, maybe the shape of the ears, so that, according to the strict logical rule they had been taught, the creature actually belonged in the opposite category.
Oh, wow. So you are looking at a creature on the screen. Visually, it strongly triggers the specific memory of a Category A creature you saw 10 minutes ago. It looks like its twin.
Yes.
But if you actually stop and apply the logical rule you memorized, the ear shape dictates that it absolutely must go into Category B. It's a tug of war between a specific visual memory and an abstract rule.
Precisely. Now, if prototype theory or purely rule-based processing were the dominant mechanisms, the participants should have easily categorized the trick item correctly. They knew the rule, they just had to apply it. But that is not what happened.
Don't tell me they fell for it.
The participants were consistently and significantly fooled.
They put the trick item into the wrong category.
Yes. They dumped it into Category A simply because it looked so viscerally similar to a specific old memory of an exemplar they had seen before. They completely abandoned the abstract rule in favor of specific visual similarity.
The implications of that are profound. It proves that human beings are fundamentally irrational categorizers. Even when we possess conscious, logical rules, even when we know the math, our brains will bypass that logic and lean heavily on specific individual past experiences.
The exemplar overrides the abstraction.
It demonstrates that individual memories exert a massive gravitational pull on our cognition. We don't just rely on abstract averages. The specific things we have seen dictate how we interpret the world.
This is a critical juncture. Let's make sure the fundamental difference between these two theories is crystal clear, because it's a very common point of confusion for students.
Let's review it.
A prototype is an idealized average. It is a mathematical summary of features that your brain computes over time. And crucially, a prototype might not even exist in the real world. You might have a prototype of a dog in your head that looks like a perfectly generic 50-50 mix of a golden retriever and a spaniel, but that specific, perfectly average dog has never actually walked the earth.
It is an artifact of your cognitive statistics.
Exactly. Whereas an exemplar is an actual specific memory of a concrete entity that you have personally encountered in space and time. Your childhood pet dog, Buster, is an exemplar. That stray dog you saw outside the coffee shop yesterday is an exemplar.
Exemplar theory says you use the memory of Buster and the stray to categorize new animals, not an imaginary average.
Right.
Now, surely the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? I mean, we can't just be hoarding millions of memories without eventually trying to summarize them.
That is the consensus of most modern cognitive psychologists. The brain is opportunistic. It likely uses a hybrid system, depending on the situation and your level of expertise.
How does that work?
When you are first learning about a new category, say you start bird watching, you rely heavily on specific exemplars. You remember the exact blue jay you saw at the feeder. But as you gain massive experience over years and you see tens of thousands of birds, those exemplars eventually blend together.
And your brain generates a highly efficient prototype to save processing power.
Exactly. We use exemplars for the specific exceptions and prototypes for the broad strokes. But you must understand the distinct mechanics of both theories to understand the literature.
Okay, we have spent a lot of time zoomed in very close. We've been looking at how we represent a single concept, whether it's through a composite sketch or a specific memory of a robin, a truck, or a fake alien creature. But we need to zoom out.
The big picture.
Yeah. The human brain holds tens of thousands of these concepts. Millions, probably, if you count the subtle variations. If they were all just floating around randomly in the cognitive void, we'd never be able to access them fast enough to hold a conversation. How on earth are these thousands of concepts physically filed away and interconnected so that we can access them instantly without our mental computer crashing?
To answer that, we have to look at the macro architecture of the mind. And the dominant model that explains this vast organizational structure is the semantic network approach. Specifically, the foundational hierarchical model proposed by researchers Collins and Quillian.
Semantic networks. When I hear that, I always picture a vast, glowing, three-dimensional spider web inside the brain. Or maybe like the map of a massive subway system.
Both are excellent visualizations. Collins and Quillian propose that knowledge is organized in a highly structured, interconnected, web-like hierarchy. The architecture of this network consists of two primary structural components, nodes and links.
Nodes and links. Let's define those on the map.
A node represents a specific concept. It is a single point, a station on your subway map. So you have a node for the concept animal, you have a separate node for the concept bird, you have a node down below that for robin, and maybe even one below that for Buster the Robin.
And the links are the physical lines, the subway tracks connecting those stations together. They represent the relationships between the concepts.
Exactly. So there's a link connecting the robin node directly up to the bird node. That link tells your brain the rule. A robin is a type of bird. There is another link connecting the bird node up to the animal node. The structure is hierarchical, moving from the highly specific at the bottom to the highly general at the top.
It's a brilliant organizational system, but the true genius of Collins and Quillian's model isn't just the map itself. It's a principle they introduced called cognitive economy.
Cognitive economy is the key to the brain's efficiency. It is the ultimate space-saving measure. The principle dictates that the brain stores shared properties at the highest possible level in the hierarchy, rather than repeating them endlessly at the lower levels.
Okay, let's use a very concrete example to make the mechanics of cognitive economy obvious. Let's talk about vehicles. Picture the hierarchy. At the very top, you have the general abstract node for vehicle. Down a level, you have a node for car. Below that, branching out, you have specific nodes for BMW, Honda Civic, sports car, minivan.
Perfect setup. Now consider a property like it has 4 wheels. Almost all cars have 4 wheels. If the brain didn't use cognitive economy, it would have to store the data tag has 4 wheels attached to the BMW node.
Right.
And it would have to store another copy of has 4 wheels at the Honda Civic node and the sports car node. It would be writing the exact same piece of code thousands of times across the network. That is massive redundancy. It wastes storage and slows down updates.
But because of cognitive economy, the brain refuses to do that. Instead, it takes the property has 4 wheels and it bumps it all the way up the hierarchy to the general car node. It only stores it once.
Just once.
So when I look at the window and see a BMW, my brain activates the BMW node. But to figure out how many wheels it has, the activation simply travels up the link to the car node and it inherits the has 4 wheels information automatically. It's an incredibly elegant way to conserve storage space.
It is the pinnacle of biological efficiency. But, as we always do, we must ask, how does this perfect, logical system handle the messiness of reality?
Right. We talked about exceptions earlier. What about that 3-legged dog? Or, to stick with our vehicle hierarchy, what about a 3-wheeled car? Like those weird little British cars from the 70s, the Reliant Robin.
Oh, I know the ones you mean.
They only have 3 wheels. If my general car node unequivocally states has 4 wheels, and my brain inherits that information automatically, how does my mind not constantly miscategorize the Reliant Robin? How does it handle the exception without breaking the rule for everything else?
The Collins and Quillian model accounts for exceptions very gracefully. While general rules are stored high up for economy, exceptions are stored locally, directly at the specific lower-level child node. And crucially, localized information always overrides inherited information from above.
Oh, I see. So up at the car node, it says 4 wheels. But way down at the specific Reliant Robin node, there is a specific localized property tag attached that says has 3 wheels.
Exactly.
When I look at that weird little car, my brain activates the Reliant Robin node. The localized 3 wheels tag acts like a stop sign. It overrides the generic 4 wheels data it would normally inherit from the parent node. The system remains economical, but it is flexible enough to handle the weirdness of the real world.
Okay, conceptually that makes total logical sense. But I'm putting on my skeptic hat again.
Let's hear it.
How do we test this? We are talking about an invisible theoretical web of nodes and links inside a living, functioning human brain. We can't put a brain under a microscope and physically see the BMW node connected by a fleshy wire to the car node. How can cognitive psychologists possibly prove that this hierarchical map with its cognitive economy and its links actually physically exists in our heads?
This is where experimental psychology is truly brilliant. To map the invisible, they use a method called the sentence verification technique.
I feel like I know where this is going. Does it involve tracking reaction times in milliseconds again?
It always comes back to reaction times, because time is the only proxy we have for neural distance. In a sentence verification task, participants are brought into the lab, seated at a computer, and asked to answer yes or no to a series of very simple statements as fast as humanly possible.
Walk me through the exact statements they used to test this.
The researchers designed the statements to force the brain to travel different distances across the semantic network. Let's look at 3 statements. Statement A, a canary is a canary. Statement B, a canary is a bird. Statement C, a canary is an animal.
Okay, the answer to all 3 is obviously yes. A canary is a canary, it's a bird, it's an animal. The participant is going to hit yes every single time. So accuracy isn't the point.
Exactly. The crucial data is entirely about how long it takes the participant's finger to press the button. According to the semantic network model, canary is a highly specific node at the bottom of the hierarchy. The node for bird is 1 link above it. The node for animal is 2 links above it.
Right, moving up the chain.
If this model is physically true, if it accurately represents the physical architecture of the brain, then it should logically take longer for your electrical signals to travel across more links.
Oh, wow. So when I process a canary as a canary, my brain activates the canary node, and it doesn't have to travel anywhere, 0 links. Fastest reaction time. When I process a canary as a bird, the signal has to travel of 1 physical link. It takes a fraction of a millisecond longer.
And when you process a canary as an animal, the signal has to leave the canary node, pass through the bird node, and travel up a 2nd link to reach the animal node. It has to traverse a greater physical and conceptual distance.
And let me guess. The reaction time data perfectly mirrors that predicted distance.
It matches it beautifully. It takes measurably longer to confirm a statement if the concepts are structurally further apart in our mental architecture. The reaction times literally map the geography of our thoughts.
That is just incredible.
It is a stunning piece of behavioral evidence that proves the existence of an invisible cognitive structure. We can measure the length of a thought.
That is just deeply, profoundly cool. We are mapping the subway system of the mind. But this network isn't just a static map like a poster hanging on a wall. It isn't dead, it's dynamic, it's alive, it's constantly shifting. And that brings us to the final major mechanism of Chapter 7, the domino effect of thought, or what the literature formally calls spreading activation.
Yes, the semantic network is highly reactive. When you think of a concept, it doesn't just sit there in isolation, glowing quietly. The activation of a single node triggers a massive chain reaction throughout the surrounding architecture.
The classic analogy is dropping a pebble into a still pond. The moment the pebble hits the water, that initial splash is the primary concept you're currently thinking about. But immediately, concentric ripples spread outward from that splash. Those ripples represent the electrical or cognitive activation spreading along the physical links to all the closely related concepts surrounding it in the network.
That's a good one. But honestly, I think a better analogy is a power grid.
A power grid. Let's explore that.
Think of the nodes as cities on a massive electrical grid. When you focus your attention on a concept, it's like a massive power plant in one city suddenly surges with electricity. The city lights up, but the system is interconnected. That excess voltage naturally bleeds out into the high-tension wires, the links connecting it to the neighboring towns.
Oh, I see.
The neighboring towns don't get the full surge, but their substations warm up. They get a buzz of residual electricity before they even turn their own lights on.
That is an excellent mechanical analogy for spreading activation. When a primary node is activated, the adjacent nodes receive that residual voltage, and they become what we call primed. Because they have received that ripple of energy, they are brought closer to the threshold of consciousness. They are hovering right below the surface, making them significantly easier and faster to access if your brain needs them a split second later.
But once again, we demand evidence. It's a beautiful theory, the power grid of the mind, but how do we prove that a surge in one city actually warms up the neighboring towns? How do we prove that priming is real?
We look at a classic, highly influential experiment conducted in 1971 by Meyer and Schwaneveld. They used a specific procedure called a lexical decision task.
A lexical decision task. Walk us through the methodology.
It's a word recognition test. Participants sat at a screen and were shown pairs of letter strings. Their job was very simple. Hit the yes button if both strings were real English words, and hit the no button if one of both of the strings were fake, nonsense non-words.
Okay, so if the screen flashes apple and chair, I hit yes. If it flashes apple and blarg, I hit no. Simple enough.
Yes. But Meyer and Schwaneveld weren't interested in them fake words. They were secretly manipulating the semantic relationship between the pairs of real words. Sometimes they showed pairs that were highly related, concepts that sit right next to each other in a typical semantic network, words like bread and butter.
Classic pairing.
Other times they showed pairs that were both real words but totally unrelated conceptually, like bread and doctor.
Okay, let me predict the outcome based on the power grid theory. If spreading activation is real, seeing the word bread triggers a massive surge of electricity at the bread node. The voltage immediately bleeds down the links and washes over the butter node because they are structurally adjacent. The butter node is now primed, it's warmed up.
Exactly.
But the voltage doesn't reach the doctor node because doctor is located on the completely opposite side of the mental map. It's too far away to receive the residual energy.
Your prediction is exactly what the data showed. The participants were significantly measurably faster at hitting the yes button for the real word pairs when the concepts were closely related. The prior activation of the word bread literally sped up their brain's physical ability to process, recognize, and verify the word butter a fraction of a second later. The grid was primed.
This is huge. If we step back from the laboratory and think about everyday application, this single concept spreading activation explains so much of the human experience. It explains the mechanics behind phenomena we experience every single day. Pause for a second and think about how this shows up in your life. Have you ever been sitting in a meeting or listening to a lecture trying desperately to pay attention, and the speaker casually mentions the word Paris?
And almost against your will, you are suddenly thinking about that trip you took to Europe 5 years ago.
Yep.
And then you're thinking about the friend you traveled with. And then you remember that your friend owes you $20. And suddenly you are stressed about your bank account balance and you've completely stopped listening to the lecture.
Exactly. We call it mind wandering, and we usually get frustrated with ourselves when it happens. But your mind isn't broken. It is functioning perfectly according to its architecture. One random thought drops a pebble or surges a power plant, and the voltage naturally bleeds along your highly specific, individualized links, leading you to an entirely different memory. Spreading activation is the literal physical engine of the stream of consciousness.
It explains why brainstorming works, where one idea triggers a cascade of related solutions. It explains why a specific scent, like a certain brand of perfume or the smell of pine needles, can instantly, violently pull a vivid childhood memory to the surface. The olfactory node fires, and the activation spreads instantly across a decades-old link to a specific exemplar memory. You are experiencing the physical reality of electricity moving across your neural pathways.
Okay, wow. We have covered an immense amount of ground today, pulling back the curtain on how we process reality. Let's do a strong recap of this massive journey through the architecture of knowledge. We started by exploring the fundamental difference between physical categories in the world and the mental concepts in our heads, and how those concepts give us the superpower of inference and generalization. We then completely demolished the myth of the traditional, rigid dictionary definition in our heads.
Right, we learned that the brain doesn't use strict checklists of necessary and sufficient features. We replaced that rigid view with the much messier probabilistic models of typicality. We learned through family resemblance theory that some items are just better, more central examples of a category because they share more overlapping features with their group and fewer with competing groups.
From there, we dove into the great debate on representation. We contrasted prototype theory, the idea that we compute an idealized mental average, a composite sketch of weighted features, with exemplar theory, which proved through the Allen and Brooks study that we often abandon logic to rely on a massive archive of specific, actual visual memories.
And finally, we zoomed out to the macro level to see how all this is wired together. We mapped the semantic network governed by the elegant rules of cognitive economy to save mental storage space. and brought to vibrant life by the dynamic, cascading voltage of spreading activation.
It is an incredibly elegant system, and it is the foundation for everything else in cognitive science. Think about what comes next when you study human cognition. You look at language, which is entirely about how we use physical sounds to trigger specific nodes in someone else's semantic network.
That's chapter 8, I believe.
Exactly, and you look at problem solving and decision making, which rely entirely on your ability to quickly navigate your semantic network, following the links of spreading activation to find novel solutions. You cannot solve a complex problem if your underlying knowledge isn't organized efficiently.
Which leads to a truly fascinating, somewhat philosophical implication that I think is worth reflecting on as we finish up.
Yes, I want to leave everyone with a final provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up. We just talked extensively about how spreading activation relies on the physical links that you have built in your head over your lifetime. And we talked about how exemplar theory relies entirely on the specific, unique objects and events that you have personally witnessed.
The inescapable conclusion is that no two networks can be identical.
Exactly. Since no two human beings have ever lived the exact same life or stood in the exact same places or seen the exact same things in the exact same sequence, is it possible that your semantic network is entirely 100% unique to you?
It has to be.
Think about how your highly personal, individualized experiences mean that hearing a single, simple word like ocean or dog or home activates a completely different, entirely unique web of knowledge, emotions, and linked memories in your brain compared to the person sitting right next to you. We might use the same words, but the voltage is flowing through a totally different grid. Your knowledge isn't just a mental filing system, it is a cognitive fingerprint. You are, in a very real sense, completely isolated in your specific contextual understanding of the world.
It is a profoundly powerful way to look at human diversity, miscommunication, and empathy. We are all operating on uniquely wired hardware.
It really is. It changes how you view every conversation. Now, as a final closing reminder, this deep dive is designed to be a conceptual companion to the source material. Our goal was to pull back the lens and help you grasp the fascinating why and the how behind the big cognitive mechanisms.
But this conversation is not a replacement for reading Chapter 7 yourself.
Not at all. You need to engage with the text and wrestle with the specific charts and data points the authors provide. The literature has layers of nuance we couldn't even touch on today. So keep that curiosity alive, dive into the reading, and keep questioning how your own mind works. Until next time.
When you